Okay. So let me just say I'm really happy to have the opportunity to try this out with you all this morning. I am John's mom. Dr. Kabot sounds very formal, so I'll just go by Sue. You know, John and I have a, when we work together, he tries to keep it professional, but I'm fine with Sue. So in my professional life, I run programs for children and young adults with autism at Nova Southeastern University. We have an early intervention program, a preschool program, and now a college support program for NSU students who are on the spectrum who need some pretty intensive support to be successful there. I don't know how many of you know, but we do have a child, an adult, my child, an adult now with autism in our family. John's middle brother, Mike, is 40 years old. So I've been at this a long time. I was in special ed before I had Mike, and then was able to talk myself into a position at the university when he was a preschooler there. So I've been in your guys' shoes starting from, you know, the very beginning. And I guess the one thing I would say is that pretty much we're all going to survive. That no matter how difficult some days feel, those days pass and we get through to another day and another phase of, you know, what we face having a family member or child with autism. So that would be my encouraging piece. We're all going to get through it. I was thinking about this closure of services and having to work and thinking about how difficult it would have been for me to have to do my job with Mike kind of running around the background, trying to meet his needs also. I'm kind of glad at this point that I'm not struggling with that because I think it would be a struggle. And I'd be interested to hear what they discuss in that session on Thursday night.
I'll send you an invite.
Balance that. So I think that'll be interesting. But John told me just to leave things kind of open today to allow all of you to ask questions. My training background is in special education as well as speech language pathology. So those are kind of, I think, my areas of greatest expertise, as well as families and coping and community resources. So I'm open for whatever you guys want to talk about and any questions or problems that you're having.
So can everyone see the box to type in their questions? If so, feel free to type in those questions. While we're waiting for anyone who does have questions, I guess the question I get the most, and I would love to hear your response, is how a family should prepare for an IEP meeting coming up. Do we think an advocate is a good way to go? Is it necessary? Or do we think a parent can handle it themselves?
So I think that is a good question. And I think, as with everything in the autism world, my answer is going to be, it depends. It depends on the parent. It depends on the parent's knowledge and self-confidence. It depends on the complexity of the needs of the child with autism. And I think just like everything else, there are effective advocates and not so effective advocates. And the thing that I always stress with parents is to know that that advocate is an extension of you, and make sure that the person you are selecting to be your advocate is going to present themselves in the way you would want to be represented. I think sometimes, especially when advocates are paid by families, they feel like they have to kind of prove their worth. And sometimes they feel that they can be more effective the angrier and more difficult they get with the school system. And I think sometimes their behavior may not be what you want to be reflective of you. Now, sometimes they've been reinforced by school systems by only agreeing to what a family thinks their child needs when things reach a more hostile, elevated level. And I think that's really, that makes it difficult, because you feel like you have to be aggressive and hostile versus assertive and respectful. So I think it depends. I think it depends on the training you've had as a parent in how to be an effective advocate. I'm going to give a plug to the Partners in Policymaking program, which is offered once a year to family members and self-advocates by the Florida Developmental Disabilities Council. It's a 1 weekend a month, 6-month training in Orlando, and the expenses are paid. And people who go through that training really are very enthusiastic about what it's given them and the self-confidence and knowledge that they've gained. And so I'll put a plug in for that for anybody who is really interested in building their advocacy skills.
And one of the other questions I get a lot from families of kids who either just received a diagnosis through adulthood, when I ask, have you applied for the Med Waiver program through APD? A lot of families say either no, because it's a long wait list, or no, because my child doesn't need that service right now, or I don't even know what that is. So how do you feel about applying for Med Waiver? When should families do it? And what's your overall opinion? And can you also say what the Partners in Policymaking is called again?
There it goes. So I'm used to looking at the chat while I'm talking from my online course teaching. So I can handle that, John. First of all, for people who don't know what Medicaid waiver is or means, Medicaid is the health insurance program for low income and disabled people. You get Medicaid automatically when you receive supplemental security income, SSI, from Social Security. It's kind of like a add-on. So when your child is 18, those of you who have adults in the group, if you haven't already, you should contact Social Security and apply for SSI for your child, because he or she will now be considered a family of one, and the determination will be based on his or her income and assets, not the family's income or assets. Now, there is a way for a younger child than 18 to be made eligible for Medicaid waiver by bypassing being eligible for Medicaid, which goes then through Department of Children and Families, not through Social Security. So even if your child is under 18, he or she can be made eligible for Medicaid and then Medicaid waiver. So Medicaid is one of the few insurances, health insurances, that funds long-term care and services. And for some of us, when we have children who are more complex, our children are going to need long-term care and services, maybe indefinitely. And the only way to fund that is through Medicaid. And traditionally, Medicaid has paid for things like nursing homes and assisted living facilities and things like that. They also, through Medicaid, pay for something called intermediate care facilities for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And what the Medicaid waiver says is, you know what? We don't want our individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities to be placed in nursing homes or assisted living facilities, or maybe even intermediate care facilities. We want them to stay home and in our community. And so the federal government has allowed states to say, we're going to take this pot of money from Medicaid and put it into something called Medicaid waiver. And the people we serve through that money are going to waive their right to institutional care. We're going to waive their being placed in nursing homes and assisted living and intermediate care, and provide families money and individuals with disabilities money to get their services at home or in the community. And so when you think about what your individual needs, if he or she is a younger child, if they have significant behavioral issues, for example, if you are a person who has maybe more than one child on the spectrum, or a child on the spectrum and another child with some kind of significant needs, or you're a single parent and your child is very needy, you may want some of those Medicaid waiver services, even though your child is younger. When your child's older and loses school system support, so John said some of you are families who might have 20, 21, 22-year-olds, and you're thinking about what is going to fund my child's needs, you're going to need Medicaid waiver. That's really one of the only funding streams for adults. And yes, there is a long waiting list for Medicaid waiver. So right now in Florida, the state is serving about 34,000 people with intellectual and developmental disabilities through Med Waiver, and there are about 21,000 individuals on the wait list. Now, some of that wait list might not be a real number because it may just be people whose parents said, wow, there's a big wait list. I don't really need anything, but I'm going to sign up because people told me, you know, there's a big wait list. There's been a change, and now people, it's not just a pure wait list issue. When Mike was younger, it was depending on what your number was. When your number came up, then you were offered services. Now there are priority categories. And one of those priority categories is aging out of the school system. So those of you who have children who are getting close to that age, 100% should get your child made a client of Agency for Persons with Disabilities. For those guys, there's no question about it. You absolutely 100% should make sure you do an application as soon as this crisis is over. Those of you who are in very difficult, hold on one second. I told John if I have to get up, it's because the pest control person is here. Hold on one second.
She is not doing a good job of quarantining herself right now, so I apologize. And I do see, Alyssa, your question about SSI, and I'll make sure in 1 second when she's back that gets answered after she finishes talking about APD. And like I said, this session will be recorded. It's going to be posted to our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, as well as our website. Welcome back.
Thank you. Those of you who are ever or close to being in crisis, there is a mechanism for crisis consideration. And that would be really significant behavioral or something very, unusual. But it is much easier if you are already a client, already known to them, if you have a situation that kind of falls into crisis. So if you have one of those more challenging children, again, I would 100% get that application done and let it sit there until or if you ever reach that point where you feel like you need that support from them. So what does the Medicaid waiver cover? It can cover group home placement. It can cover behavioral support in the home. It can cover someone to come in and help with some of those self-help skills like bathing your child, helping them get dressed, ready for bed, ready for school in the morning. There are a variety of services. Respite care is another one. So there's many services that are available, and what happens is you will get a support coordinator who will help you develop an individual plan of services. There are people who I think should go through the process of doing an application sooner rather than later. And for those who are feeling that things right now are kind of okay and you don't really need that support, I would, as your child gets a little older, I would really take the opportunity to get that application in place. Sometimes you can never tell either when things are going to go off kilter, and you may need them. So for example, when Mike was a late teenager, he developed a lot of mental health issues and was actually becoming psychotic, hallucinating, and became very aggressive and running out of the house and trying to jump out of a moving car. It became a crisis very quickly, whereas it had never been at that level before. So I just, use that as an example of why it's good to have like your application in, even if you don't feel like you need anything right now.
You have 2 questions at the bottom.
So you can apply for SSI. I'm not sure exactly what they say right now, but right before they turn 18, I would say. Now, those of you, if you are a little older of a parent, your child, if one of you is collecting, or disabled, if one of you is collecting Social Security or Social Security disability insurance yourself, SSDI, your child may get SSDI instead of SSI. So that's another thing to think about. Will a neurologist recommend the necessary services? I would say not necessarily. I think sometimes you're better off with a clinical psychologist doing an evaluation. I think usually neurologists, when you go in, you walk in the office, they do a couple things with your child, they observe them, they ask you a few questions, they make the diagnosis, but they don't really interact so much with your child. I think you're probably better off looking towards the psychologist, going through Child Find to either early steps or the school system, depending on the age of your child, and working with those providers to really question them about what they think your child might need on the outside. If your child is young and just diagnosed and they're 3, there is an insurance mandate in Florida. And so if you have group insurance especially, or one of the Medicaid programs, they will fund ABA therapy. So it's good to know about that. They'll also fund speech and OT therapy also. So if you get the actual diagnosis and your child is 3, you have that possibility. Yeah, if your child is 26, she could apply for her own on her med waiver. Here is the issue with that, and here's where our higher functioning individuals who are still challenged in some ways may not be able to get med waiver support. In Florida, the state is a little different than other states, and they list specific categories of disability that will make you eligible for agency for persons with disabilities. And that includes autism and intellectual disability and Down syndrome and cerebral palsy and Prader-Willi and spina bifida, and there's a couple more. So you would say to yourself, well, my child has autism, she's high functioning, but she has autism. It's going to depend on how significantly impacted she is, whether APD feels she is eligible for services through them. So another option for someone that age would be vocational rehabilitation if you're looking for an employment outcome. If your child has autism and they also are scoring below 70, they're falling in the intellectually disabled category of cognitive functioning, APD is more likely to make them eligible. If they are more cognitively intact, it can be more difficult. So you may have to look at some of these other service agencies.
And I just want to say the thing we do in May, the Jewish Disabilities Network is hosting APD at the JCC in Boynton Beach and then at JFS as well. So if you're looking at how to manage the waiver system, how to apply, or what services are offered, we'll get that information out to everyone who registered today and email later.
Yeah, someone asked, where's Ellie? Ellie asked, does it have to be a neuropsychologist? No, not necessarily. If you have a child who you think maybe also has learning disabilities, if they're higher functioning and they have learning disabilities, maybe then you might want a neuropsychologist to do the evaluation, but not if it's a young child, I don't think, or an adult. Unless you're thinking something like there maybe has been some traumatic brain injury or something unusual like that. Oh, Fernando, wherever you are. So this is the question of really the century. And I think now we are recognizing more than ever that when people have autism, they can also have mental health issues. And this was not the case when we were going through our issues with Mike. And remember, now he's 40. We got bounced back and forth when we applied for crisis. They said, no, it's a mental health issue. And then I would go to DCF, which is the agency that served mental health at that point. And they said, no, he has autism. It's a developmental disability. And we went back and forth multiple times with no one taking responsibility. I think that now people are more knowledgeable and aware that yes, in fact, you can have both. And so if you're talking about a child who has either autism or intellectual disability and mental illness, yes, they can go together. Fernando, I'm not sure, are you talking about a child who only has mental health issues and not a developmental disability? So ADHD and dyslexia would not be considered developmental disabilities, or at least not in the state of Florida. They are disabilities, yes, but they would not fall under the category of developmental disability.
Sue, I'm going to unmute Fernando for a second so he can better explain.
Okay.
All right, Fernando, you should be good to go. Fernando, you should have the mic.
So if he's on it, do we know that he has mic capabilities, John? Because sometimes desktops do not.
No, we do not.
Okay, so if he wants to either message me on, oh wait, here he is. Only SMI. Mental illness, significant mental illness, severe mental illness. So that would not be an agency for person with disabilities client. That doesn't mean that you would not be SSI eligible and Medicaid eligible. You would not be eligible for the waiver through agency for persons with disabilities.
You have two questions, one about Asperger's or high function autism and how it would apply, and then one, let me scroll back up, about an individual with autism and severe mental health issues who's non-compliant with medication and fallen through the cracks due to their homelessness and psychosis, and any advice you have there.
Right, so that kind of person, one of the other priority areas, homelessness actually is one of the high priorities, right? So either being released from some kind of forensic unit aging out of the foster care system with a developmental disability, homelessness. Those are those cases are given priority in crisis. So I would suggest that whoever is responsible for that adult contact Agency for Persons with Disabilities and do a do an application if you haven't already, and ask for crisis consideration.
And then, and this is a good topic to jump into, the question about where Asperger's falls into this. And I know this is an interesting topic to jump into.
Right. So if we go by the current diagnostic system, Asperger's no longer exists. So in the previous diagnostic and statistical manual, we had an umbrella category called pervasive developmental disorders. And under that, there were several different, what were considered separate categories. One was autistic disorder, which is kind of classic autism. One was Asperger's disorder, which was kind of like individuals without cognitive impairment who also had typical language development early on. And then the third was pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. And those were the people who kind of had some of the symptoms, but not enough or the right distribution of symptoms to say they had autism or Asperger's. And so when the newer diagnostic system came out in 2013, Asperger's went away as a separate category. And so now everybody is just lumped together under autism spectrum disorder. Now, some of you, if you have an older child, may have an older evaluation that says Asperger's as the diagnosis. And so, you know, you would take that with you to APD, you would provide them with that information. But just for your own knowledge, it is only one category now, and everybody has ASD or autism spectrum disorder. I am not sure what waivers are available for mental illness only. There are a number of waivers. It's not just developmental disabilities that has waivers. There are brain injury waivers. There are Alzheimer waivers. There are very specific waiver programs. Most of them are much smaller than the developmental disability waiver program. And here's the issue with the waiver programs. Medicaid is an entitlement. Once you get SSI, you automatically get Medicaid. And so with Medicaid comes certain entitlements. The waiver is not an entitlement. The state is able to say, we only want to put this much money into waivers. And that will allow us to serve this many people. It's not an entitlement. So they don't have to serve every person who meets eligibility for the waiver. There's a question about, again, a higher functioning individual underemployed, which is not uncommon. I would say that vocational rehabilitation is one of your options. Depending on your Center for Autism and Related Disabilities and what they offer, they may provide some supports, maybe social skills group or executive functioning group, maybe getting a psychologist privately to work with your adult individual in that area. It is a real need for sure. But I would say probably VR would be your best option.
And can you mention CARD? I'm not sure everyone's familiar with CARD or what they offer. Can you explain, I guess primarily based on our audience, starting with the FAU CARD, but just CARD in general?
Okay, so CARD stands for the Centers for Autism and Related Disabilities, and they are a state-funded program through the Department of Education. There is a CARD at most major universities across the state, so ranging from FSU to UF to UCF, USF, going down the coast more to Miami, and your CARD would be Florida Atlantic University, FAU. And Dr. Jack Scott is the executive director of that site. They basically serve more as a resource and referral program. But most of the cards do offer some direct service. They will do generally school observations for you. They will, help you with figuring out what your child might need in terms of extra services. Someone asked that question about, will the neurologist tell me? Not necessarily, but CARD might be a resource for that. They may have social skills groups. I know our Miami CARD has some groups for adults that focus on pre-employment training. So I would say those are the kinds of things that would be available to you through CARD. They generally do parent training. They'll do training for school systems, for the staff there. Any of those kinds of activities.
And we have a question about scholarship options for private schools for students with high function ASD who are very gifted, where maybe public school isn't the best fit. Can you talk a little bit about Mackay, Step Up for Students, Gardner, and those different options?
So I can talk more about Mackay and Gardner. I'm not so familiar with the Step Up for Students, but there is a website. It's called Florida School Choice, and it has information about all of the scholarship programs for individuals with disabilities. So Mackay is probably the best known to be, well, there are actually two pieces to the Mackay. One is, I have been in public school for a year, and I don't really think it's meeting my child's needs. So I want to take the money that that the public school system is getting for my child and use it towards tuition in a private school. Now, to do that, your child has to have been in public school for 2 consecutive, what are called FTE count periods. So in October and February, they will count children in attendance in public school for the school system to get money. So your child has to have been in school during the week in October and the week in February. for you to be able to get the money your child generates. Now, that money is based on the services in your child's IEP. And it can range for a very high-functioning child getting minimal services to, I don't know, I don't have the chart in front of me, maybe $7,000 to $25,000, $24,000 for a child with more intensive services. And if your private school has gone through the application process and is approved, you can take your money and use it towards the tuition in private school, approved private school. Gardner, your child never has to have been in public school. You have to have a diagnosis, and in Gardner's case, and whoever asked the questions who said my child has ADHD and dyslexia, you may be eligible for the Gardner Scholarship. Now, the Gardner Scholarship, your child has to be age 3. It is around $11,000, between $10,000 and $11,000, and you can use it for things like, I'm homeschooling my child, I need specialized materials. Or I want to use it to pay a private therapist. Or I want to use it towards private school tuition. You can do that. You can use it towards a Florida prepaid scholarship program.
So
I think you can use it for an ABLE account. So, but again, there is a limited pot of money, so you need to apply early in order to access that money. But that $10,000 or $11,000, whatever it is, can also be used really for a wider range of services than the Mackay Scholarship. The other thing the Mackay Scholarship does, it allows you to explore other public school programs in your county or in the adjacent counties. So I don't know what's north of Palm Beach, Martin?
yes.
You were living up in the northern part of Palm Beach and you thought Martin County had the most unbelievable autism program near you, and they had room in their class. You could ask for a transfer to that program. So that's the other thing that the Mackay does. And you should contact your school system and look at the state website to make sure you understand the deadlines for applying for that.
Can you do both Mackay and Gardner at the same time?
No, you can't do Mackay and Gardner. You can't be in a charter school and get Gardner. You can't be in any kind of public school and get Gardner.
And
now you can be, if you have parents of young children here, you can be in a VPK program and get Gardner.
wait,
Or a subsidized childcare program and get Gardner.
so let me put a scenario out there to you, which I know is part of this question. If a child was in a private school-based VPK program, but wanted to use Mackay for kindergarten, would they be able to, or since they're not in an FTE window in a public school, would they not qualify?
They would not qualify.
So
They would not qualify.
If you are the family of a young child and you know you want to use Mackay for K and above, keep in mind that a private preschool will not meet the Mackay requirements.
That's correct. We have that problem even in our preschool for typical kids in our center. Because we don't do VPK or subsidized childcare, we are not able to accept Gardner for any of our students. So that is true. Is there a limited amount per child? And if I use it so for Gardner, it's each year. And I think, I'm not sure about this. You'll have to check the website. I think there are limits to how much you can accumulate and not spend in like a college prepay or let me just think what the other one is, the college or the ABLE account. I think there are some limits. I don't know them. I would look at the Florida School Choice Scholarship site.
And then a new topic, kind of shifting a little bit from there. For some of our families here, they might have a child with special needs or going through the diagnostic process, and then 1, 2, 3 neurotypically developing children at home. Shifting from your professional hat to your parent hat, how did you juggle handling both and not giving so much attention towards your child with special needs to the detriment of another child?
Yeah, so you could probably help me answer this question. I'll tell you from my point of view, and then maybe John can tell you from his point of view. I think that I was only able to survive because I had fabulous support from grandparents. I had 2 sets of grandparents in the area. One was incredibly able to manage Mikey and his behavior. The other were not so good at that, but they were better at things like helping pay for a van to take one of the kids to preschool so I wouldn't have to drag Mikey, or paying for a cleaning lady so I didn't have to clean the house. They weren't so good with interaction, we'll come and babysit. They weren't so good with that, but they were good with other things. The one was fabulous with the babysitting piece, or going to both of my other boys' sports events and school activities and taking them places and coming down and getting them dinner, any of that. That was the only way, because I had a really big job, and I also did 2 graduate degrees in that time too. I did the speech pathology master's and I did a doctoral program. And so, I am pretty economical in the way I use my time, but without all of that support, I think I would have, been in a really different place.
No, and I think from my perspective, having the family community at your back to make sure that maybe you weren't at my soccer game, but a grandparent or a good family friend was there. And if it wasn't you, there was always someone there, was very big, I know, for myself and for our other oldest brother.
So I think it's about also knowing what each of your resources has to give, right? That, not to kind of be upset or angry when what you need is not necessarily what's able to be given, or what your priority is not able to be met necessarily, but to take whatever support you can get from people, because, you know, some of our kids are very difficult. Michael was one of those children and adults that is very challenging. And, you know, it is, for most of us, a long-term issue, and we need to garner the supports that we have. Luckily, there are more supports available, more programs available, more options available in terms of community resources and recreational programs, and more people knowledgeable and trained about autism than ever before. So I think, you know, in some ways, those of you who have younger children are luckier because more things are in place. It may not feel that way, but definitely there are.
And we have a question about the Gardner scholarship and if the matrix score, the IEP code, affects your Gardner the way it does Mackay, or if it's just a straight size.
No, it's a straight one size. Oh, no, I shouldn't say that. I don't think it's a straight one size, but most people are not using public school experience to get it. So in that sense, most people are getting 10 or 11,000, but I actually think there is a way, if you have an IEP matrix, to get more. But you should check on that.
We have an in-law question that you
I got it.
might be excellent at answering.
I see it. I see it. I see it. I mean, I think that grandparents are in a little tough position, right? Because I think grandparents, number one, they're hurting for their own children and what their own children are dealing with, and they're hurting for their grandchild. You know, I think they've got like the double whammy of seeing in some ways how difficult it might be for their own child, as well as for their relationship with their grandchild. I also think there are a lot of differences in the way different generations bring up their children, right? So I know, for example, my mom thought my house was like a free-for-all. She thought for me, I was not setting any boundaries for any of the kids, that they were just allowed to do anything. You know, there was no making them do chores or being responsible or whatever. And I think, I guess, as parents, we have to realize that maybe the way they brought up their children, or in that day and age, the way people brought up their children, may be different. Some of them, if they're not with you a lot, may not on an everyday basis see how difficult it can be. And some of them just don't know what you need or how to help you with what you need. And I think some of us aren't so good at asking for help. So I think some of us have to take some responsibility for sharing what would be helpful that you think they could do in order really to help, or to model what seems to work, or to find a grandparents group, or to suggest to the JCC or Jewish Family Services or CARD that they do a group for grandparents. Just like I think you guys as parents are all your own best supports and the best sharers of information, I think grandparents need that too. They need other grandparents to be able to communicate with and talk to.
And there currently is a grandparents group at JAFCO down in Sunrise. I know it's a little bit of a drive, but if there is a group that's interested in a grandparents group, feel free to reach out to us and we can see if we can do one closer. question about canceling Mackay before applying for Gardner, and then the topic of talking to VPK parents from a school perspective when they're seeing possible signs of special needs.
So if you're saying you have Mackay already, but you're not going to use it for a private school tuition, is that what you're saying? And then you can't be in public school. So where are you? Are you homeschooling? Are you in? So you can't be in public school and get Gardner?
Sorry, I'm unmuting her. Sorry.
Okay.
Sarah?
Hi, we were applying for Mackay to possibly move out of our currently public school. But now that I'm hearing about Gardner, do I need to go online and cancel the Mackay, or is it going to do it automatically once I apply for Gardner?
I would call the Florida School Choice Program, or are you in Palm Beach County?
Yes.
Should be somebody in Palm Beach County schools that is the person in charge of school choice.
School choice.
You can call that person and ask them. I don't know the answer to that question. I would imagine it's not done automatically.
Okay.
But I can't say that.
And then is a VPK teacher at one of our agency schools, how would you bring up that sensitive topic to a family who either doesn't see it, isn't ready to see it, or no one's ever had that conversation with them before?
Right, so, we're sitting here with a whole group of probably mostly parents, and I'm sure if we all think back to the beginning, and how we recognized it, or how someone spoke to us about it first, I think that can almost kind of like make or break the way that parent is able to accept or kind of work themselves through it. I can remember vividly, having a special ed background, I brought it up with my pediatrician. When Mike was 2, they said no. At his 3-year checkup again, well, maybe, but I don't, And then I went, I want to go to a neurologist. So I went to the neurologist, and he had the worst bedside manner in the whole world. He watched Mike have a temper tantrum in his office for, 3 minutes, and said to us, he's either autistic, retarded, or both. That was exactly what he said. And I could tell you that soured me on this doctor like forever. Like, I never referred anybody. In all the millions of kids I've seen and referred over all these years, that doctor has lost gazillions of dollars because of the bad taste in my mouth. And so it's a really difficult position for a VPK teacher to kind of put themselves in, especially if they don't have a good special ed background. So I think that VPK teacher should go to their program director and work with them. Maybe that program has some resources or more knowledgeable people who can help kind of broach that topic in a kinder, gentler way. Some parents are not ready to hear it. Some parents have been thinking about it, and it's almost a relief when somebody brings it up. But I think kind of professionally, we think about it, wouldn't we rather have, hi cutie, wouldn't we rather have, that's not you, John, I was not waving to you.
I was waving at the child, relax.
Oh, okay. I think we're not doing our job, we're not taking our responsibility seriously if we just let it go. because there may be a parent who's like almost never ready to hear it, and we've then deprived that child possibly of a year or so of strong intervention. So I think in the end, we're not doing anybody a favor, but I do think the way we do it, approach it, is really critical to the way that family is going to be able to accept it, to move forward with it.
And I'll say some of what we're doing with some of our families is having the initial meeting where we're saying we're seeing some red flags. Here's what they look like. Here are some strategies that we're going to put in place to address those concerns. And let's reconvene in a couple weeks and see where we're at, how those strategies are working, and what the next steps are. And we're seeing that kind of that 2 or 3 weeks is giving them that processing time to start to pay attention to those red flags, come to terms a little bit with what's being discussed, and that follow-up meeting is being more successful than that initial blindside meeting. And we're seeing some better results going about it that way so far this year. Someone asked about my experience with a sibling with ASD and mental illness and how it's affected me positively and negatively. And I would love to get my mom's perspective on if she thinks that we were impacted positively and negatively that way. So for me, I think some of the positives with Mikey have been, first of all, my patience level is very high, which has helped me professionally in working with staff members and families. I think my outlook on life is very, whatever comes our way, we can handle it. My mom, and I'll give her kudos on this one, very much raised us as Mikey threw a tantrum in the middle of the night and hid his poop all over the bedroom, and we have to clean it up first thing in the morning. Let's turn it into a game of hide and go find the poop, and let's have fun with it. And it really taught myself, and I hope I'm speaking for my oldest brother as well, that patience that we can handle anything that gets thrown our way. Nothing is as big a deal as we're making it seem. Even right now with this fun situation we're all going at, it's all right. We're shifting to virtual teaching and doing virtual trainings, and that's just what it is, and let's move forward. Because I grew up in a house where there were no set plans. We might have plans, but the plans were whatever Mikey made the plans that morning were our plans for the day. And having that flexible thinking as a sibling has helped me handle all the fun that comes up in the world. It really taught me family and the importance of it. And I think my relationship with my oldest brother, Brian, is so much stronger than it would have been if it were not for Mikey, because we realize how special that relationship is because our relationship with Mikey is so much different. Our relationship with our extended family is so much different because we see what it's like having a brother who is not as communicative, and we can't have that type of relationship. With, I think negatively, where it's impacted me the most, and my mother or my wife might disagree, is I've become very used to putting everyone else's needs ahead of my own. It was Mikey's needs come before my needs. I can never say, I really want this, because if I really want Outback for dinner and Mikey's demanding Red Lobster, we can either go to Red Lobster or we can have a giant tantrum in Outback. We're going to Red Lobster. So I learned from a very young age, my needs weren't what Mikey's were, and I had to really work on as I became an adult of it's okay to advocate for myself and to put myself above someone else's needs. And that still is something that's very hard for me. And I think that's where the negative impact has come a little bit. And then I think positively, the one lesson I really took from our family was if you guys pull your resources together, you can do anything. For my mom, for some reason, correct me if I'm wrong, her biggest thing was Mikey being bar mitzvahed. You know, we knew Mikey wasn't going to play Little League like the other kids, and she was okay with that. And we knew Mikey wasn't going to, go to the middle school dance the way that other kids might, and she was okay with that. The one thing she wasn't okay with was Mikey not being bar mitzvahed like every other 13-year-old Jewish boy. And 27 years ago, synagogues weren't as open to the thought of a significantly disabled child being bar mitzvahed, and we had to fight for someone to accept having him bar mitzvahed. And we put all our family resources together, and he loved, this will date how old we are, he used to love listening to music on cassette tapes. So a few months before his bar mitzvah, my mom took all his cassette tapes away, had someone she worked with who was fluent in Hebrew record all his prayers on cassette tapes. And all he could listen to for those months were his prayers for the bar mitzvah on cassette tapes, so that when it was time for his service, he, who's very echolalic, could go ahead and repeat what was being said on those cassette tapes going forward. And the whole family really pulled together. He had a full bar mitzvah, a party that was fantastic with all his classmates like any other child. We adapted it. We did it on a Monday, so there wasn't another child being bar mitzvah the same day. We did it on a Monday, so the service was shorter, but it was a bar mitzvah like any other child had. And it really showed me that there's nothing you can't overcome without a family pulling together. And I think that's really the biggest positive impact that Mikey had on us. But Mom might feel differently.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think Mikey continues to be kind of the glue that holds our family together, even though he's not living in the family home anymore. There's something about, even though I've been divorced for a long time now, you know, his father and I are still very involved together. And I think that really is because of Mike. I think if Mike weren't Mike, I don't know how that would have played out in the end. But I think that, you know, he really is the glue. And I'm lucky that John decided to go into special ed and Brian in finance. And so together, they each have a role in what's going to happen with Mike in the future.
Any other questions for Sue while we have her? We are very appreciative of her volunteering her time to the J today to make this possible. That's why she got to wave to the grandson before this started. That was the first thing. First do the training, then you can see your grandson, some basic behavior principles at work here. But anything else?
Yeah, John, how to find me if anybody has any questions, you know, private questions, personal questions they think I could help them with, I'm happy to do it.
All right, if there aren't any other questions, like I said, this was recorded. It will be posted. If you have any questions in the next minute or two, type it in, we'll answer. If not, if you do have a question, email me at Jonathan, JOHNATHANK at jcconline.com, and I will reach out to my mother and then send it to you guys. And I'm typing my email address in the chat box now for you guys. And I think what we are going to do, so you guys can keep your eyes open for it, is a weekly Ask the Expert. So I'm going to reach out to an SLP with some background and maybe in assistive communication, one of the leading BCBAs in the field, see if we can start to do this while we're on lockdown, a weekly session that might be beneficial to the community as a whole. So thank you guys so much for joining. We'll hang for a minute or two, and if not, have a great day and feel free to join us on Thursday night for the How to Work and Have a Child at Home session. I think that's probably much needed.
Bye, everybody.
My email should be in the chat box. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it should be in the chat box, but I'm sending it again. Let me know if that works now. All right, guys, have a great day. Stay safe, and we'll get out the information for next week's meeting and hope to hear from everyone soon.